Mother Nature is in trouble.
Recording in progress.
That's why we have made a plan for the future that takes responsibility for our past. We call it Lifetime Carbon Neutral. For almost 80 years, Velox roof windows have improved indoor life by letting in daylight and fresh air. Now it's time to step out of our carbon zone. We will dramatically reduce our future carbon emissions in line with science and ask our suppliers to do the same. But that alone is not enough. We will capture all the CO2 we have emitted since we were founded in 1941. Our entire historical carbon footprint by protecting and restoring forests around the world. So, by our 100-year anniversary in 2041, we will be lifetime carbon neutral. We're doing this together with WWF. They know where new forests are needed and where old ones should be preserved. Lifetime carbon neutral is a new approach, but the method is as old as time itself, using trees' unique abilities to capture CO2 from the air. It's far from easy, but it's effective and it's good for biodiversity. We encourage others to follow in our footsteps, because everyone needs a healthy home, including Mother Nature. It's our obligation. It's our plan. It's our nature.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event titled A Nature Positive Planet. It's our common objective, organised by Velox, a globally leading roof window manufacturer. I'm Helen Clarkson, I'm Chief Exec of the Climate Group and a member of the We Mean Business Board, and also a very happy customer of Velox. I got new windows this year. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. What we just saw on the screen was the launch movie of the Velox Group's Lifetime Carbon Neutral commitment, which Velox announced in September last year. And it's also a call to action to other companies to take ambitious climate action. Through the Lifetime Carbon Neutral commitment, Velox commits to reduce its future carbon emissions from their own operations as well as from their suppliers, and on top of that, take responsibility for the company's past emissions by implementing forest conservation projects around the world in partnership with WWF. And one of these forest projects has already been initiated in Uganda. And so it's the lessons from these projects that we're going to talk about here today. So let's welcome onto the stage Mr. David Briggs, the CEO for the Velox Group. And also we have Mr. Tom Okello, the Executive Director for the National Forest Authority in Uganda. And we're going to be joined by Mr. Marco Lambertini, the Director General for WWF International, on the screen. And together, the three of them represent the cornerstone of this historic 21-year partnership between WWF and the Velox Group, which will deliver a significant part of the Velox commitment to become lifetime carbon neutral by 2041. So welcome, all of you. So today we're going to discuss three overall issues. What role do partnerships between NGOs and companies play in achieving a climate and nature positive planet? The case for inspiration, so hearing what Velox has done to take responsibility for its carbon footprint and the role that partnerships play for a company like Velox to achieve its objectives. And then thinking about the role that NGO and private sector partnerships play locally and the areas where action's taking place. So I'm going to ask a few questions to each of the panelists, and following that we'll have a couple of rounds of panel discussions, and there may be time for a few questions by the audience, so put your questions into the chat. We might only have a time for a few, but let's start now with David. So as CEO of Velox Group, I think you've been deeply involved in this program. So let's start by asking you about the lifetime carbon neutral and the call to action film in mind. How is Velox working to reduce its scope 1, 2, 3 emissions?
Well, thank you. And yes, I've been deeply involved for sure. Of course, the part which has attracted people's attention and which we'll discuss most of all is the historical carbon repayment of our scope 1 and 2 emissions. It means taking 5.6 million tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere, which is what we calculate to have been the amount of CO2 that Velox will have put into the atmosphere by our 100-year anniversary in 2041, including a 25% buffer, just to be on the safe side, so that we're not in any way greenwashing on any aspects of that. But actually, the part which is more significant in terms of effort ongoing is connected to our signing of SBTi's 1.5 degree pathway for the most ambitious companies. I think we're about the 300th company in the world to have signed that particular commitment. And it means, first of all, it meant us understanding that as a manufacturing company, only 6% of our carbon comes from our scope 1 and 2 emissions, and we've pledged to reduce that to 0 by 2030. That is relatively straightforward because we can do it through initiatives like saving energy and installing renewable energies on site, but also signing purchase agreements for renewable energy sources from other companies. We've signed a partnership with Schneider Electric to help us with that in particular. But the realization that 94% of the carbon that goes into the atmosphere in the production and distribution of Velox windows comes from our supply chain, so our scope 3, and the requirement for us to reduce that by 50%. And when you know that at the same time Velox has high growth ambitions, and that the target is an absolute number in kilos of CO2 equivalent, you can quickly see that that is a massive commitment that we've made. So that involves a lot of work on the design of the products, and it involves intensive work in partnership with our suppliers, particularly of aluminium, of glass, which are some of the most carbon-intensive materials that we use in the production of the windows.
It's an amazing commitment. I understand you're one of the first companies in the world to make that commitment, so looking at historical emissions, first in the construction industry as well. So let's talk a bit about why you decided to do that. What led to it? What do you expect to gain from it? And maybe a bit about the business case.
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, I think that what we recognized in Velox is that we're in a privileged position. So we are a relatively high margin company. We have a high market share, and we have an ownership which is foundation and family led. So it means it's a long-term, stable ownership which has always placed sustainability and doing right for society as a core objective of doing business. And in that context, we realized that we could, first of all, take the most ambitious path for our future requirements, but perhaps we were in a position to punch above our weight in terms of demonstrating to other companies what might be possible if you are willing as a company to try to do more than you think is possible, and certainly more than you are required to do or asked to do. And that took a little bit of creativity, and that's where we came up with the idea of repaying our historical carbon debt. Now, Microsoft, I think, was the first company to announce that they would do that. They do it by developing new technologies which will remove carbon from the atmosphere. We're not a technology company, but we are a company that works with wood. So we recognize the ability of trees to do the same. And we were also very conscious that we wanted to look not only at the climate crisis, but also at the biodiversity crisis, which is something, of course, which carbon removal technology doesn't address. So it was in that respect that we took that step. And what do we expect to gain from it? Honestly speaking, there's no business case for it. There's absolutely no way that I can put a business case on it at all. It is a belief that being at the forefront of what is required to address some of the challenges the planet has will be good for us as a business in the long run. But I can't put a number and say when the payback is. Absolutely not. What I can say to you is that 80% of the people that I've been looking to recruit for senior positions over the last year have joined us because of our carbon commitment. So how much better does that make us a better business going forward? I believe in it, but you need to believe in it.
Thank you. And I remember years ago hearing someone say leadership is doing things when there isn't a business case, and having the faith that you say that will repay. And I think we've really seen some great examples of that foresight and watching it pay out. And as you say, you're already starting to see it with talent. That's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, very much so. And it's required leadership, you can say, from our management group, but also from our owners and our board of directors to say, well, actually, yes, we think that doing the right thing is good business in the long run.
Thank you. I want to turn to Marco Lambertini, the Director General for WWF International, who's joining us virtually. I see him up there. Looks like he's joining from a forest. That might be a background. How does WWF work with partnerships, and how does corporate partnerships fit into WWF's mission to stop the degradation of the planet's natural environment and to build a future in which humans live in harmony with nature?
Thank you so much, and apologies, I'm not with you in person. I left yesterday. I stayed the whole week in Glasgow last week. Listen, first of all, let me just say one thing, because I think David has been extremely humble and honest in saying that perhaps Velox is a privileged company, but actually I want to acknowledge the strong show of leadership of Velox in this case. Firstly, because they committed to the SBT, the Science-Based Target for Climate, 1.5 degrees target, which is in itself pretty ambitious, and it's super important. Every company should commit to that. Secondly, because they're going beyond with the historic carbon emission capture program. And then thirdly, what you just said, David, is super important, because we also are together developing projects that provide triple benefits for climate, for biodiversity, and for local development, which we'll understand better when we talk about the Uganda project. So big hand, and I commend Velox for the leadership, and we're very excited about partnering together. To your question, clearly a business is a major source of footprint in terms of climate destabilization, climate change, as well as nature loss, biodiversity loss. And so engaging with business and supporting the business as, I would say, critical friends and partners at the same time, it's critical to really drive key economic sectors in particular that are top responsible of natural loss and climate change today, to move and transition towards sustainable practices. Top of the list, of course, the food systems, both on land, agriculture, and on the ocean, fishing, energy, of course, forestry, infrastructure. These are the key drivers of natural loss today. And top of the list, even more perhaps, really the financial sector, because at the end of the day, if we are not going to be able to redirect the current investment, public subsidies as well as private investments, toward sustainable practices in all this economic sector, and accompany a transition which is just, inclusive, and leaves no one behind, we won't get to not just net zero in terms of emissions, but also as we support a global goal of net positive for nature, so a nature positive outcome. So fundamental for our strategy to engage with the private sector.
Thank you. And can you talk a bit about how WWF works at local level to implement partnerships?
As this kind of global brand that is quite well known, but in reality we are a federation of local leadership and local operations in over 100 countries around the world. This has been going on for decades, and has made us part of the local social fabric, if you like, with strong presence on the ground, strong connection with the society in each of these countries, with the decision makers. And so this is super important to be credible, to understand the local context, and to be able to develop, of course, solutions that fit those particular contexts. So that's a strategy that we've been deploying for many years now. But more importantly, perhaps, one dimension is how do we engage with companies, and how do we set an ambition that is actually adequate to the effort and to the purpose of the partnership. And this is where we we have a very clear strategy, and we put in place, in discussion with every company, clear outcomes that deliver on the primary source of footprint of that company, and develop clear outcomes, develop clear reporting mechanisms, so that both the company and ourselves are going to be able to track the impact on the ground. At the end of the day, the whole purpose of coming together, both from our side, but also from a company side, has to be deliver change in the particular sector that we focus on. And so defining the objectives, defining the reporting, and working together to deliver in the real world, are the key principles that inspire our partnership with corporates.
Thank you very much. And so that brings me to you, Mr. Tom Okello, Executive Director for the Uganda National Forestry Authority. So we just heard the Uganda project is the first Velox funded forest project in this 20-year partnership with WWF, and the project will be led by WWF Uganda in partnership with your organisation, the National Forest Authority. Please describe, can you tell us about the value of the forest projects and how that's going to work, and how the projects you work with, like this one with Velox?
Thank you so much. Before I answer that question, let me probably give you some statistics on Ugandan's forest. By 1900, the Uganda forest cover was over 50% of the land area. By 1990, this has declined to about 24% of the land area. By 2015, it had declined to 10% of the land area. And to date, we are talking of about 12.4%. So in very many years, we have seen a slight increase in the forest cover. This forest cover is both the tropical high forest, the woodlands, and also the planted forest. And at one point, we were having a very high rate of deforestation at about 90,000 hectares per annum. And most of the forest outside the government formally gazetted and protected forest reserves and wildlife conservation areas are being decimated. This has led to loss of wildlife habitat, loss of connectivity to this wildlife habitat, human-wildlife conflicts, and also loss to livelihoods of the neighboring communities. Now, a project like the one we have with WWF, supported by Velox, contributes to helping us address the drivers of deforestation, and also addressing the challenges which we, the forest managers, and our neighboring communities meet in managing the forest. We expect this project, and so far we are seeing the project contributing to enhancing our capacities as forest managers through training and reorienting us to the forestry for meeting the climate change needs. It is also enhancing our technical and financial capacity to conserve these forests, and also providing us with technical expertise and financial resources for forest restoration. The project area also suffered the deforestation I've just talked about, and we are aiming at doing restoration not only in the government forest reserves, but also within the neighboring community or the adjacent community land. The project is bringing on board synergies, innovative approaches, and experience from other successful areas. For the last 20 years or so, we have been with WWF, and we have not implemented a project of this nature. We have done a lot of community conservation and development projects, conservation projects, tourism development projects, but this is time now where we are bringing on board the climate equation. We want to engage and build capacity of the forest adjacent communities to participate in forest management. And we want to enhance their livelihoods, because unless, my president one time was saying we cannot conserve poverty. If we try to conserve poverty, then we are wasting time trying to conserve the forest resources. So this project must contribute to the community livelihoods needs and also to poverty alleviation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can you tell us more, how do partnerships contribute nationally, regionally, and locally?
To me, at the national level, partnerships should try to contribute to achievement of the country's development, conservation aspirations. For example, in Uganda, we have the National Development Plan, where we are aspiring to restore the forest cover to 15% by 2025 and to 40% by to 24% by 2040. Now, a partnership like this should really help us to move towards achieving this national aspiration. Partnership should also help us to address the issues of emissions of greenhouse gases and also contribute to our NDCs. And we also view these partnerships to help us fill in the gaps in implementation, that is provision of innovative approaches towards emission reduction and also management the impacts of climate change. At the regional level, I'm looking at the landscape level, and in this case, we are looking at the Albertine Rift. We think this partnership should help us with the restoration, that is restoring the lost forest cover. We have worked with WWF before and other partners, and in this region, we had already restored about 30,000 hectares of degraded forest landscape. We expect partnerships like this to help in the establishment of multi-stakeholders platform where we can heavily, candidly discuss conservation and protection of biodiversity at the landscape level. And we would really want it to build on the existing partnerships which are already there. We look at these partnerships to also help in diversifying the funding mechanisms for conservation. For example, through enhancement of tourism products. You know, this project area is an area which is very rich in biodiversity and has a lot of protected areas, and it is a tourism hub for the country. We also expect the partnership to enlist private sector participations so that we can bring on board the private sector, not only in conservation, financing, but also to participate in conservation. And finally, at community level, we looked at these partnerships to build capacity of the communities, but capacity building should not only be for the communities, even at the local government and even at the national level, to develop resilience to climate change. So partnerships should help build capacity for the communities to develop resilience to climate change and also improvement of the livelihoods of the communities themselves. We have seen in areas where we have had partnership before, around some of the major protected areas, we have seen incomes of the communities going up, which is a good approach. I've already said we should not conserve poverty, because when we try, then we'll not achieve our objective of conservation of natural resources. We want the partnership to empower the community, especially the disadvantaged groups. We piloted a project mainstreaming, for example, sexual and reproductive health rights in conservation. So we need to leverage on some of those approaches which have been successful in these areas. We also need to establish nature-based cooperatives and enterprises, which we must target to improve the household incomes and also create jobs for our community members.
Thank you. It's really great to hear how it stacks up at all the different levels. I want to go to kind of a panel conversation now around that's getting deeper into this partnerships question. So how partnerships that focus on transforming value chains can drive the transition to a more nature positive industry. David, let's start with you on that one.
Well, within our industry, the construction sector, I mean, first of all, you have to understand that around about 40% of the carbon that's released into the atmosphere every year comes from the building sector. That means that the buildings that you and I spend 90% of our lives in. both in terms of the embodied carbon that goes into the materials that constitute the buildings, and then the carbon that's used to heat and cool and operate those buildings. And that whole segment is extremely fragmented, and it goes from building owners, but also the people who design the buildings, the people that produce the components that go into the buildings, the people that operate the buildings, the people that run the buildings, the people that demolish the buildings. It's a very complex ecosystem. So the notion of addressing that issue in isolation, the notion of anybody being able to make any serious impact in that ecosystem without partnership is fantasy. So for us, partnership is necessary through the value chain, but partnership is also necessary with regulators, with the governments that are deciding the codes that regulate how the buildings are produced and how they're disposed of at the end of their lifetime. And I believe that also there's a big part to play, as we've just proven here with WWF, working with NGOs and others to ensure that some of the benefits of this are going through to communities in terms of a just green transition. So all that to say that partnerships is at the heart of everything that we need to do in this area.
Thank you. And I think, as you're talking there, thinking about how sometimes the capex and the opex fall in different places, and how does that work in terms of sharing that within a value chain like that? Is that something you've been kind of getting into?
Yeah. And we struggle a little bit, to be honest with you, in terms of really being able to clearly define business cases for some of the capex that we would like to engage in, and that is partly due to the fact that measurability is not always there. It's partly due to the fact that governments are not providing the frameworks with which companies can rely to make investments in buildings in the future. So yes, we do work on that issue quite intensively. Too much of what we are doing as a company today is made possible because of blind faith. We need to move to a situation where actually we can measure the benefits of some of the work that we're doing to improve this stuff. That starts with very simple things. I mean, we need a carbon tax.
Thank you. Marco, same question for you on transforming value chains and the role of partnerships within that.
I think David has covered that quite well. Can I actually focus on the kind of natural value chain that actually allows us to deliver real impact on the ground for climate, for nature, and for local development? And Mr. Rockello very eloquently just mentioned as a critical component of the whole picture. Because when we say invest in nature, invest in nature-based solutions to climate, we have to make sure that the investment is high quality, high integrity investment, an investment that actually has the ability to be permanent, to be resilient, not to have lateral effects. In many cases, we end up, we are seeing projects like this ending up planting trees in the wrong place, planting the wrong type of trees. We actually are creating more problem. They're more prone to forest fires. They're introducing alien species and diseases. So it's not like investing in nature is so straightforward like perhaps many people think. We need to apply the right technology, the right technical knowledge, and the right political decisions to make sure that these investments are the right ones. They are delivering the benefits for climate biodiversity and local development as we planned, and they are resilient, and they guarantee permanence of these results over a long period of time. And one other thing we really appreciate about this partnership is the long-term nature of this partnership. To achieve results like the one we want to achieve, we need to build over time and consolidate over time those results. So I answered your question slightly in a different angle, but I hope that was okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I want to move on to, I think you've all sold us on the case for partnership. We're all on board. Partnerships are necessary. Let's talk about some of the experiences of that and what it means. And, I've got a question here about best practices. I'm sure people want to hear about, let's put it politely, lessons learned, some of the pitfalls. Where should we start on this? Let's talk about that experiences and what makes for a good partnership. Tom, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, thank you. Now, just like any partnerships for nature-based solutions must be built on mutual trust of the partners, and also must be demand-driven and must bring the people on board. Unless we bring the people on board, then this partnership may not have any meaning at all. Because I've seen areas where we tend to focus so much on nature, and you find a project coming on board but thinking about nature and leaving out the well-being of the people who are surrounding these natural resources. So the partnerships must also have a bottom-up planning approach. We have also seen partnerships which are built on thoughts which are made somewhere probably at the national level, and then they bring it down at the forest level or at the community level, and then it fails to get the necessary support from the people who interact with this nature on day-to-day basis. So these plans, when we are planning, we must embed the national, the local, and even the regional development plans within the plans which we are doing for partnerships. And we should not ignore the existing governance, existing partnership arrangement within the area where we are planning to develop these projects. And in many cases, I've also seen partnerships which does not live to celebrate a first birthday after the exit of the main partner. For example, in this case, after the exit of Velox or WWF, we want this partnership to continue existing. And how do we do it? We really need to embed the long-term sustainability planning and implementation within what we are doing right at the beginning. Unless we bring on board the long-term nature of these partnerships, then we are not going to achieve our objectives. Nature-based solutions cannot be achieved probably in 1 or 2 years, no. We really need long-term planning, and in this case, we are planning for 20 years. 20 years is some good time. If we can sustain it, then probably we are going to be very successful. And many of the projects I've said don't bring on board the long-term planning, and then they don't live to see that first birthday after the exit of the main partners. And what is also required is capacity building. We need to build the capacity of everybody in the implementation circle so that we achieve that sustainability after the partners have left. So in a conclusion, I would say partnership must lead to the restoration and protection of nature, must lead to the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but above all, must improve the human well-being and also contribute to the local and national socio-economic development. Otherwise, it may not have that meaningfulness which we desire. Thank you.
Thank you. Marco, let's go to you on this question.
I think Mr. Okello just really captured the key point, and this partnership in example exactly of that. I think we started a discussion between WWF and Velox, and now here we're discussing it with a new critical partner, the government of Uganda. And as we develop the implementation plan and we actually beginning to reach the ground, of course that partnership will expand to the local stakeholders in the areas where we work. So our experience is very similar. Partnership may start initially in a small group of organizations or players, but then has to expand accordingly to the needs of a successful implementation. And so that will happen, started already to happen, and will happen in every single site where we'll operate under this partnership.
Thank you. And I want to go to you, David, on this as well. We've heard, I think, some really interesting things there about trust, long-term partnerships. Tom said, the nature isn't going to happen in a year. I've got sort of two questions for you building on that. One is how do you build trust, and how do you get into something for a long term? And then actually, how do corporate structures either facilitate that or actually hinder that? Because often, the next quarter is what matters. And so, how does your corporate structure help you with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's super questions. I mean, first of all, we had to decide who we wanted to work with in partnership because we don't know how to do reforestation. We don't know how to solve some of the social issues that you might have in Uganda or some of the other places where there are projects planned. What we knew was that we wanted to be a lighthouse, we wanted to be an example, and we wanted to do something which was imaginative and innovative and hopefully would inspire others to try to do more than they thought possible. Now, quite honestly, we started with understanding that WWF is an extremely reputable long-term organization, NGO, which has a very, very solid reputation and has an understanding of how things work on the ground. That was very important for us because we can't decide whether we should fund a project in Uganda or in Sierra Leone or in Myanmar or in somewhere else. So it was very important for us to have that kind of a partnership. But then businesses and NGOs are not the same. We don't think the same. We don't operate the same. And there was a period where we had to get to know each other and to understand the way those things function. And honestly, that was not always straightforward. But we were always confident in the goodwill and the best intentions of our partner. And that overrides everything else that you have to organize in terms of understanding people's budgeting processes, people's control mechanisms, what an auditor places on us as a responsibility for ensuring that we're spending the money wisely. Then, as I said, Velox is fortunate because we have owners who are committed to the long-term ownership of the business and who are committed to the business's impact on society. That makes it possible for me to talk about an investment over a long period and which is significant because I have owners who are receptive to that and not just to the next quarter's results. But we are nevertheless a business. I'm not a charity. So nevertheless, in those discussions, I need to convince the owners that this is a valid business investment, because otherwise they could simply take their dividend and use it as a charitable gift. That could be an option for them. So we had to develop mechanisms which enabled us to take a discussion on what business values we thought we might get out of this long-term partnership. And we had to have owners who were prepared to listen to those arguments without having the normal ROI calculations that we would make for any other investment in CapEx or increase in OpEx or whatever that we might see on a day-to-day business process. Then finally, because we all recognized our owners and we were, WWF were very insistent upon that this only works if it's a partnership which lasts for years. We had to organize a contractual setup which protects the partnership. I might not be the CEO of Velox in 2 years' time. And if the partnership depends on the CEO every year thinking that it's a good business case, then the dependability of that investment for the projects that you're talking about would not be there. So we had to structure a contractual arrangement which, to some degree, protects WWF from a business climate which may change, or a business leadership which may change. And luckily for us, we had owners who were prepared to recognize the value of that and recognize that if we didn't structure a contract in that way, we would risk somebody withdrawing from the contract in 3 years' time, and then effectively all we would have done is buy some good cheap publicity, which is exactly what we don't want to do. So we did need to learn a huge amount about how to work together and recognize the specific situations of WWF, of the people in the projects, but also they also had to work with us in understanding that we need to be able to deliver some kind of value which we can point to as business benefit and not just charitable donation.
That's great. And it's really great to hear that recognition that, CEOs are quite known for liking to do things their way when they come in. And so protecting that, I think, is really interesting to hear about. We've got time for some audience questions. At the beginning, I was told put them in the chat, but we've got live people in the room who hopefully can just ask their questions. I don't know if I can see a chat box, but we've got a question here in the front row. Can I give you a microphone? One's coming.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay if I sit? Okay, thank you. My name is Mary. Badoy. I come from Uganda, and I'd like to thank the three presenters for the good presentations. I'm a little bit disturbed by the fact that there's a lot, maybe controversy on issues of conservation, issues of preservation, and then restoration. Because one is that the human beings must survive, but they're surviving on what is available, which is reducing, but also we are stopping them from getting into those spaces where perhaps they're supposed to have their survival from. So I'm just wondering what WWF and the very complicated name of the organization, what you're doing in this case to try and, harmonize the two. How are you balancing the needs for the people, but also the wish that we have the forest? Secondly, is that we know that in some areas there is need to have political will to have all these things in place. But we also find that maybe there are many countries that are experiencing a little bit of political interference, political... So I don't know how you people are going about with this and whether you're able to win that war of politics, because politics sometimes, comes over and breaks everything and covers everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a question, I think, right in the WWF wheelhouse. We talked about the mission of WWF for humans to live in harmony with nature. So, Marco, I'm going to put that one to you.
No, thank you so much for the question. I have to say, this is a question that touches the heart of the challenge of our times. With a growing population, with a growing consumption need, with the inequality gap widening, with so many pressures and imperatives of developing to promote economic development that supports, our fight to eradicate hunger and poverty and malnutrition and all the other social challenges that we're facing. That question is the question with the capital in capitals. It's how we can actually manage to integrate nature conservation with economic developments and human well-being. Now, what we have been learning over the last, I would say 50 years in particular, is that developing economically at the expenses of the environment is not going to do it. And if we continue to think that we can actually grab natural resources without putting in place sustainable uses, we're going to find ourselves in an even more precarious situation than today. There are already estimates, as you all know, that the combination of climate change and natural resources depletion, it is going to not only undermine future socioeconomic stability and development, but is already beginning to affect the past progress, with more people falling into extreme poverty in places affected by climate change. And nature loss is not different. It's going to drive equally similar humanitarian crisis. So your question is totally valid, and that's why I mentioned earlier, and I hope you acknowledge that. I mentioned earlier the need for these initiatives, nature conservation or economic development, to be mutually supportive. We can't think anymore of developing a conservation initiative that is just about conservation of nature and a humanitarian initiative that is just about human development. The environmental and the human development agendas are fully interdependent, and we need to tick both boxes every time we do one or the other. That's the challenge, that's the opportunity, that's why we need partnerships. So that would be my acknowledgement of your question, very important question, very important point, and our commitment to combine the two every time we operate in any region of the world.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we've got another question. Yep, back here, and then we've got one at the front after that. If we get time.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Hassan. I'm working for one of the international organizations for the migratory water bird conservation in the most threatened flyway, called East Asian Australasian flyway. So I just wanted to introduce, this is a partnership. We work with a government partner, the international organization, intergovernmental partner like LAMSA, and private sector. So my question today was so impressed to see all of your perspective on the different aspect on the positive planet. But we talk about the partnership, but we are a little bit struggle how to engage the private sector. And then just, so, but we do have the one private sector partner out of the 39, but still we are looking for the way that how to engage this private sector in this element. We talk about climate change and we try to intervene the biodiversity laws, but still I feel like there's a huge gap between private sector and the government partner and then international organizations. So we're talking about different story and then have a different ambition. So I just wanted to hear from the private sector that how you would suggest how can we convince and raise a voice properly.
Thank you. David?
I fear I'm not going to be able to give you a very good answer to it. For the very straightforward reason that, we in Velox, we do most of our business in Northern Europe and in the United States. And so our understanding of in what way we might beneficially enter some kind of a partnership with countries like the ones you're representing, or Uganda for that matter, are limited or non-existent. So I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. It is exactly why, and it's also referring to the previous question, it is exactly for reasons like that that we engage in a partnership with somebody like WWF, who does, we hope and believe, understand how to implement those partnerships at a local level, and essentially to use the money that we are happy to provide to combat the climate crisis in an effective way that works with the local communities. It's exactly for that reason that we chose WWF as a partner, because we believe that they have that knowledge to engage with you correctly and properly in a way that we would simply not be able to do. We had, and I think that's not a secret, at least I hope it's not, I mean, our first project with WWF was scheduled to be in Myanmar. And we did, WWF did quite a lot of work in that project before the unfortunate political events with the military junta retaking control, let's say, over the country, and we were forced to put that project on hold. It's exactly those kind of issues and arrangements with local governments that we as a private entity, which is based in Northern Europe, doesn't feel competent to take. But we have full confidence in our partner, which is WWF, to do the right thing. So I'm afraid I can't give you advice on how to engage with Velox, but I can certainly say to you, engage with the NGOs that are on the ground, and they have the skills to engage with us. And if they do more of it, and if this partnership works in the way it started to work, and I believe it can continue to flourish, I hope that they'll have more funds available to be able to engage with you over the course of the next decade.
Yes,
Probably let me add something to what David has said. Engagement with the private sector is a very complex situation. And in most cases, the experience we have is we are looking at how, for example, do the big ones offset their footprints, their carbon footprints. Can they do offset projects? Can they support community development projects? Can they pay for the ecosystem services which they are deriving? But also there are those which are doing profit-making, nature-based investments. For example, ecotourism around some of these conservation areas. So that is how so far we have been discussing and engaging the private sector. But just like David has said, it is not easy, because many may not be willing to spend that part of their profits unless they are really thinking about a charity like Velox is doing.
Thank you.
I think we know how to engage with governments when we want to make an investment in manufacturing or when we want to make an investment in a market. We understand how to do that, and we do it regularly, we do it frequently. This is a different type of engagement which is required, because it's an engagement based on money that we want to invest for a greater good, but which is not directly related to our business in the specific country. For that reason, I think we need an intermediary who understands how to make the most of those things.
Thank you. I'm really sorry we don't have time for this last question because I've got very strict instructions to ask at 20 past what the next steps are in the cooperation between WWF and Velox. And Marco, I think you're going to talk us through that.
Well, I think the next step is clearly to develop together and with the necessary expanded partners, the really most exciting projects on the ground. At the end of the day, David's and Velox company's David and Velox commitment is to contribute to their historic to compensate for their historic footprint, and that requires very high quality, high integrity programs on the ground that allows them to achieve that. They have developed a very strong methodology. That was one of the reasons why we decided to partner in this innovative approach. And so the next step for me, definitely is to really look at the ground, select the right projects, the right partners, and get our hands into implementation. That's the most exciting part of the partnership for sure.
Thank you. And we're looking at a map here. Actually, if we can have the map back. Can you talk us through the map that we're looking at and where the projects are going to be located and some of the priorities there?
I'm afraid I cannot see the map right now, and I don't have it on my screen. But the spread of the projects is significant. Is across different regions and different continents. It matches criteria of high potential carbon storage, high biodiversity value, high local community engagement, and yeah, here you can see the map. It goes around across a number of hotspots for both biodiversity, but also, as I said, they need to also fulfill criteria of high carbon value and high potential for community engagement and economic development. Those are the key criteria that will trigger then the decision at the site level. And that's in order to tick the triple outcomes, the triple wins that I mentioned at the very beginning: biodiversity, climate, biodiversity, and economic development. And of course, as David said, when you go into remote areas and across the world, sometimes you discover that the feasibility of the project is not as clear or simple as predicted, or new developments like the political ones in Myanmar forces you to put things on hold or to develop an alternative strategy. We'll have to go through all that. When it comes to delivering on the ground, things get complicated and difficult sometimes, but with our experience, with our presence on the ground, with the collaboration with the local partners, governments, and civil society and local communities, we're confident we will be selecting the right projects, and Uganda is the first example of one of those.
Thank you. David, tell us a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we have committed firmly, irrevocably to removing 5.6 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by 2041, and we've committed to doing so in partnership with WWF. My expectation is that therefore we will end up with 4, 5, 6 rather major projects which should contribute to that. They all need to be of high quality because, of course, as a business we want to get what we're paying for. So we want to remove the 5.6 million tons from the atmosphere. We don't just want to give money to a project to be able to say that we're working in partnership with WWF. So we expect there to be more projects. We expect them to be properly managed, properly governed, for the benefit, for the removal of the CO2, for the benefit of the local community, and for the benefit of biodiversity. And I would say simply that I know very much that WWF are working on those, finding those projects.
Mother Nature.
We're waiting to pay for them.
Fantastic. So please join me again in thanking all our speakers today. We wish you really good luck with this partnership. Looking forward to annual updates at COP. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mother Nature is in trouble. That's why we have made a plan for the future that takes responsibility for our past. We call it Lifetime Carbon Neutral. For almost 80 years, Velox roof windows have improved indoor life by letting in daylight and fresh air. Now it's time to step out of our carbon zone. We will dramatically reduce our future carbon emissions in line with science and ask our suppliers to do the same. But that alone is not enough. We will capture all the CO2 we have emitted since we were founded in 1941. Our entire historical carbon footprint by protecting and restoring forests around the world. So, by our 100-year anniversary in 2041, we will be lifetime carbon neutral. We're doing this together with WWF. They know where new forests are needed and where old ones should be preserved. Lifetime carbon neutral is a new approach, but the method is as old as time itself, using trees' unique abilities to capture CO2 from the air. It's far from easy, but it's effective and it's good for biodiversity. We encourage others to follow in our footsteps, because everyone needs a healthy home, including Mother Nature. It's our obligation. It's our plan. It's our nature.